Are you struggling with an addiction in your life right now? It could be alcohol, drugs, pornography, or something else. Have you tried or considered walking away but are losing the battle? Addiction is passed down in part from generation to generation, but so is recovery. The good news is there's a roadmap to recovery, and I've brought a guest who will share some gold nuggets of that roadmap with us in just a moment, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge, a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability and culture of their family's environment. Now, here's your host, Jonathan Guerrero.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest is licensed advanced alcohol and drug counselor and licensed mental health counselor, Sarah Allen Benton. Sarah is also the author of Parents in Recovery. Sarah has also been a parent in recovery from alcoholism for over 18 years. Sarah, thank you so much for being on the Fatherhood Challenge.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sarah, what is your own story of recovery and how did that lead to becoming a counselor and writing Parents in Recovery?
I was 27 when I entered into my recovery journey, and it was preceded by 12 years of binge drinking. And I was a high functioning alcoholic. So I was really successful in school. I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of outside accomplishments. But I had an inability to control my intake when I would start drinking. And this, for many years was fun and social and humorous. And then as I got into my, mid to late 20s, it started not to be funny anymore. And in fact, something that I couldn't stop the cycle of. So after about 4 years of trying to control my drinking with various and clearly not successful techniques, I entered into sobriety. And through the help of therapy, through group therapy, through self-help programs, through social supports and spiritual pursuits, I have been sober for over 20 years. So my journey into recovery started before I became a parent. And some of the parents I interviewed actually had different orders for those. But I had quite a bit of sobriety under my belt when I became a parent. But what's interesting is I don't know if it made the journey any more simplified for me as a parent. I found becoming a parent in recovery actually really challenging. That's probably what prompted the book. Because I realized that I had so many years in my sobriety prior to having my daughter where it was all about me. And I was able to do all of the things I needed to do on so many different levels for my recovery and balance. And that got all rocked when I became a parent. And so really the story of this book also begins with me walking into a bookstore, seeing a book that was called Mother Noise, reading about how this mother was grappling with Cindy House, the author, grappling with whether or not to tell her 11-year-old about her addiction and how it's such a part of us. And it struck me that there just wasn't a lot out there about nonfiction wise, maybe memoir wise, but nonfiction wise about navigating this path.
So from what I'm gathering out of this, there were so many things at play in your success in breaking that addiction and removing yourself from it. It wasn't just one magical thing. There were so many different things involved.
I think that point is crucial and never to be underestimated. I'm in the field of addiction treatment and I'm also in recovery. So I see it from both sides. And what can happen is people get fixated on one particular thing being the thing that saves them from their addiction. And really what it is to your point, it's a lot of different aspects and domains of our lives that we need to foster a lifestyle of recovery. It's not just, just don't use, don't drink, don't pick up, porn, don't engage in addictive behaviors. It's an entire lifestyle change. And it's not all at once. It's gradual, it's over time, it's different for each person. But you'll notice, and the parents that I interviewed in my book all had a way that they had created recovery in the different domains of their lives and that they had to shift in each of those when they became apparent.
There's another really important point that I'm hearing here, and I want to just kind of dig a little bit deeper into that, and that is the spiritual component of it. There are a lot of people, and maybe even some listeners listening to this episode right now, that may have heard or may currently think that the be all end all answer is spiritual. That's the one and only thing I need. I need to just connect to God. I need to give it all to God. I need to lean on God to remove this from me. And then just like that, boom, at the snap of a finger, just like that, it's going to be gone. Everything is going to be okay. I'm no longer going to have the desires or the cravings or whatever it is. And that's going to be my fix. And I want to impart for you, while I don't want to discredit that that can happen and it is absolutely possible, spiritually speaking, and this is also scriptural, God will often and most commonly use resources around us. Often, more often than not, multiple resources around us. We live in the physical world here. While the spiritual is nice, we live and dwell and exist in the physical world, surrounded by resources. And oftentimes it is those resources that God will direct us to, looking at this from a spiritual lens. So there's multiple ways we can come at this. And this is why I'm so glad for the audience to hear from you and even from others that you've interviewed.
Well, that's a powerful point because spirituality and religion are very important for many people in recovery from all sorts of afflictions, right? There's medical components that spirituality and religion help people with. There's emotional, there's addiction, there's so much. I mean, it's a cornerstone for many people. I've actually seen, cautionary tales of people who relied too heavily on spirituality or religion and did nothing else. But that's one, and again, I use the term domain. Spirituality is one domain. There's also actions to be taken in terms of your emotional health, your physical health, your daily schedule, your work life balance, your balance with your children, your fun, your downtime. And so I think that our God leads us to, that are brought to us to utilize, and then we can sort of let go in that sense. But we have to do the legwork, right? So it isn't sit back, pray, and do nothing. That's really not what it's about. It's about feeling a flow and a path and taking balanced action in all of those different domains that vary time to time, stress to stress, and also using your spirituality as a superpower as well.
There's a word that's come up so far in this conversation that's interesting. The word is lifestyle. What do some of the changes look like in parents changing from an addiction lifestyle to a sober family lifestyle?
Well, I was very deliberate in using that term in the title of my book because through the years, I've more and more, through my work with other people in recovery, had these discussions about how when I first got sober, there was a lot of feedback to me from people in my life saying, why don't you just stop drinking and just keep things the way they are? Your life's pretty good and people like you. And why does everything have to change? And I didn't know. Like I didn't have a field guide to sobriety. I went to self-help meetings, but I didn't understand that it's almost like when you pour a glass of water or a little bit of water on your desk and you're like, oh, it's just a little bit of water and it seeps into everything. That's the same thing with addiction. And therefore, recovery needs to be the antidote to that. So we don't realize until we stop addictive behaviors how it impacted a lot of our decision making. And it impacted a lot of the different areas of our lives, who we spent time with, what work we did, where we hung out, what social activities we did, if we did anything in that sense, how we managed our stress, our recreational activities. So it actually drives a lot of our lives. So when we enter into recovery, all of those areas are then needing shifting because they were rotating around the addiction, whether conscious or subconscious. Again, I wasn't aware of this until I removed that addictive behavior from my life. And so slowly through the years, I started to see that this isn't just a removal of the addiction or the addictive substance. It was a complete reorganization of my life. And so the parenting component is even more interesting in that sense because you have your layer of recovery and those different changes and lifestyle changes you make. And then you add this other layer on top of it of parenting, where it's not about you and you have this other being that has needs. And suddenly everything sort of, your equilibrium gets thrown off and you adjust. But again, kids have different phases and stages and all of that. Um, so the lifestyle as a parent, and you start to see it as a sober parent, and you can, really read about it in the experiences of parents that I interviewed, where we do feel a little bit different than other parents. We don't feel like we have the luxury of just getting completely stressed out and checking out with substances at the end of the day. We don't have the luxury, if you should call it that, or the right. Actually, we've lost our privilege and our right to use substances moderately because we don't have that ability, but to show up at a party on the weekend and just throw them back. So for much of our society, there is that cultural component, and it's hard to undo that. And I say lifestyle because a lot of our culture, and many in specific areas, even more so in specific fields, and there's a lot more of a socially acceptable nature to substance use. And so a sober parent or a parent in recovery is living their lives different. Their reward system is different. The way that they engage in self-care as a priority is different. The fact that they may have to integrate more balance and not run themselves completely ragged, that they need to address their mental health issues. And again, it's not that everybody shouldn't do these things, but let's be real. A lot of people don't, and especially when they become parents, they lose all sense of balance, and they oftentimes lose themselves.
You mentioned care. This is a great segue into my next question, which is why is it imperative for a dad in recovery to take care of himself? What could that care look like for a dad?
Well, I think it's interesting to speak specifically to fathers, because I don't think fathers get enough credit for their role in parenting. And I think that there's been some type of a societal shift where a lot of fathers are much more involved in the activities and the caretaking of children. They're not just bringing home the bacon; they are involved in many different aspects of fatherhood. So, in the past, I think that there was a lot of this work hard, play hard mentality that could often involve substances. And again, I think that men and women's recovery is very different. I do think that women have the ability to bond and to connect in different ways. I think sometimes men struggle to connect with each other in their downtime and in the activities they're doing without substances. Some groups of men, again, there's exceptions, of course, but I do think that there is this kind of bonding, and the substance, drink or pot or other substances, can bring down inhibitions, allow men to connect. And so when, whether it's at home or with their friends, like when you take that away, social groups change, work socializing changes, the events you're going to, the way in which you manage your stress, like where's your outlet? How are you going to get that energy out? What kind of exercise or mental exercise or spiritual exercise do you need to do? How are you going to now connect with your friends? There's so many questions. And I think that men also struggle with the vulnerability piece of getting their needs, or being in touch with their needs, or identifying how they're feeling and expressing that.
Very true. Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's really different for both. And I've worked with, personally, I know, and interviewed and have had clients like male and female, and I really feel like there is a significant difference.
Why do you think it is important for kids to know about their parents' past lives as addicts?
The disclosure levels were different. But at a certain age, I do believe it is very important to share with your children about the fact that you do have an addictive issue, because it's highly genetic. And so this would be much like having diabetes in your family, or cancer in your family, and not sharing it with your children, because there are preventative actions that can be taken to help decrease their chances of having it. So in the case of substance use disorders, it's genetics account for about 50% the chance of developing it. But on the really positive side, the Surgeon General has found that if you postpone substance use, specifically alcohol, to the age of 15, you decrease the chance of developing an alcohol use disorder by 40%, regardless of family history. That's pretty significant. And each year after that, it's about a 7% increase in decrease, sorry, in chance. So the conversation really doesn't have to focus on, oh my gosh, I did the craziest stuff when I was younger, and get into the war stories. But what it can involve is that you had a loss of control over your drinking, what that looked like, or substance use, what that looked like, what that felt like, so that they can also identify if and when they do try it, that they maybe have a similar experience, and how you can set them up for success to possibly be a normal drinker in this world, right? I mean, not everyone has to fear it, but how can we have a healthy respect for it? And how can we set our children up to understand their genetics? So the conversation isn't just about trauma bonding and, I just want them to know really who I am. That is part of it. I mean, it does feel nice to have my daughter now, who's a tween, know that I don't drink for other reasons besides health. But there's also pieces of it that's been an education process with my daughter.
Is there an appropriate age to bring that conversation up?
I think there's a particular age that feels comfortable for each person. I noticed, and I really listed off in the chapter around different stages. I remember just listing off all the varying responses that I got from parents in recovery, because I realized there isn't an answer of what age, but I would say, like, as a therapist, I would recommend that by the time that alcohol and substances become part of the landscape in your child's life through school and through the community, that they have some understanding of their family history and some prevention strategies.
So it looks like that there is a mentality shift that has to take place in your own thinking as you're talking to it with your kids, and you reveal that the secret of that really is the generational component, addressing it that way. And so that brings the issue very much to the present tense. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's really an interesting take on it. And, I think that there's my recovery pride chapter is really something that I just can't speak highly enough, the concept of having pride for being in recovery, but there is baked into our past use and past debacles that we had. Most people have those kinds of stories from their past use. There is shame around that. And also there's a fear, I know from a lot of parents, that if I share these things with my children, that they're going to think that they're acceptable or they're going to get ideas. Um, that isn't always the truth. In fact, a lot of children have the opposite response, where some parents got sober after they became parents, so their children already saw some of the behaviors, and so when they got into recovery, their children were relieved, and this was a source of pride in their family. For others, it was a thing of the past, and the child would have never known it to happen, or it was in the really early years when they didn't have much of a memory. So some of the stories are cautionary tales for children, but I think you also have to gauge the temperament of your child. And are they risk takers? Are they impulsive? Are they risk averse? Are they, do they listen and process and really, and do they learn, or are they rebellious? Like, I think some of it's a personal choice and really an assessment of your own child, of what you choose to share.
What are some of the ways that dads listening can cope with fear, stress, anxiety without resorting to an addiction to numb?
Well, that is the $1 million question, right? And stress is there for the entire world. It's not just here for people with substance use disorders and addictive behaviors. But what it is that we all have turned to more maladaptive. Maladaptive is the term I use for it, a more of a maladaptive coping. So how do we turn that around? And it takes time. First of all, I think people are going to experience cravings when they increase in their stress level or whatever it was, the prompt that was leading them to engage in the substance use. But some of it is gradual and over time. I do think that social support and the self help meetings that are now so readily available since the pandemic, because things have gone virtual and in person, you have both. There's so much at our fingertips for social support. So I would say one of the things is really finding a group of men and women in a self help group that you can connect to, that you can vent to and have a release. It's like the balloon starts to fill up and you need to be able to let the air out and do that in a safe environment. I do find in particular and I'm again generalizing for men, that more extreme exercise seems to be something that I don't know if it's hormonally driven, but it seems to be something that a lot of men in recovery are drawn to, and that has really been a key component for them in their recovery. There are certainly some women that would attest to that as well, but I see it in a more extreme way with men. I also think that the spiritual component can also be a great add on. There's also the need for your family to have an understanding and adapt, and the family system to itself have a parallel recovery process if your spouse isn't in recovery, or if you're single, to have some level of understanding. And that's another reason why, in some ways, the disclosure of being in recovery is also a discussion around the need for self care as a parent with your child. Because if it's not baked in, again, as part of your family system and part of your lifestyle, then you start to feel guilt, or people give you a hard time. But my daughter only knows me as a person that needs certain downtime, certain self care things. That's all she knows about me. She's never known me to not have those needs. And so, again, it can become part of that culture in your family and part of your lifestyle. It has to start slowly, but it really is possible. And I've seen many men transform their lives. And I've also seen amazing stories of men who had children when they were using, and then children in recovery, and had completely different experiences. And it's really a beautiful thing to see.
You use the term parent in recovery as if it's an ongoing thing. I mean, is does that term really ever expire, or are you always in recovery?
I do identify as a person in long term recovery, but it is, and I do believe and I do feel with the amount of time I have in recovery, that it's still something that I have to actively work on. And it comes in different forms, but it doesn't mean that suddenly I'm cured and I can just behave and do what everybody else does. As far as my thinking that I could also go pick up a substance and because I've been sober for 20 years, be fine, I've proven that to be wrong over and over again prior to my getting sober. I would take breaks from drinking and I would go back and I would have exactly the same experience. So I know as a fact that if I picked up now, nothing would be different. If not, actually, it probably would have progressed and be worse. So, yes, I believe it's an ongoing process. I also believe that recovery is a growth opportunity. And so the recovery process, it gives us a launching pad to grow in different ways that we were all stunted when we were in active addiction.
How can cell phones or other digital devices get in the way of living a sober lifestyle?
It's such a part of our lives, and it also has addictive qualities. And so there's been a lot of research and a lot of work by some amazing researchers, the work of Ann Lemke, Dopamine Nation, and just a lot of discussion around the impact on young minds, on the dopamine priming effect, and how people that have addictive behaviors can also be more prone to have more of an addictive relationship with their phone, and vice versa, where I also talk to my daughter around electronic usage from the perspective of addiction. So I talk about the effect on the brain. I talk about how, the movie The Social Dilemma is brilliant. And I think even just the first half of it is really appropriate for tweens and teens. Um, really educational and helps them to understand that we're not just being nags and we're not just trying to give them a hard time, but that there's some basis for why there are some limits and boundaries with phones. But I think adults have their own reckoning because these apps, and social media apps are designed, and that's a lot what that movie's about. They're designed specifically to give us a dopamine hit every time we get a like and every time we get feedback and every time there's a notification. So again, there's a lot of crossover between the parts of the brain that get set off by addictive behaviors and our phones. So I think there's a million strategies which are discussed in the book, both for ourselves, as parents in recovery, and also for what we can support our children with, because it's a two-prong experience. And really, there are so many strategies, but I think it's important to be aware of our own relationship to our phone, what our weak spots are with it. Are there cleanses that we need to take from particular apps? It's a necessary evil for work, and we can't unrealistically remove our email and our texts and just be missing. But at the same time, do we have parameters and limits we can set for ourselves and actually stick to them? Um, those are questions we have to ask ourselves. There's also the other impact of social media and seeing how everyone is advertising and being their own PR agent around their lives. And there can be this fear of missing out or FOMO, especially for people in early recovery who are not going to some of those social events, but yet have to have them in their face. So some of this is a self-induced torture that we do by staring at what's going on in other people's lives when maybe we need to keep it a little bit more focused on our own.
How can dads listening now learn more about you, get counseling, or get your book, Parents in Recovery?
Well, my website is bentonbhc.com, and I have information and resources there. I also highly recommend finding a therapist with addiction experience. It is a specialization. It's not something every therapist is trained to do. So I think that Psychology Today has a wonderful directory and can point people sometimes in the right direction. Also, I encourage you to contact your insurance company and try to look up therapists by specialization. Um, as far as social media, I've started a Parents in Recovery Facebook group. It's called the Parents in Recovery Support Group, and it is a Facebook group. And I also have LinkedIn with Sarah Allen Benton and Facebook. But I really appreciate feedback. My email is on my website, and I really love getting readers' feedback. It really makes it worth it. And also, if people are looking for support in different areas, I also like to help people sometimes, find resources in different parts of the country.
And just to make things easier, if you go to thefatherhoodchallenge.com, that's thefatherhoodchallenge.com. If you go to this episode, look right below the episode description. I will have all of the links that Sarah mentioned there posted right in the description for your convenience. And Sarah, as we close, speak to that dad that has tried to become sober and free of addiction, but is discouraged and feeling defeated.
Well, I think that there's many people that have been in your spot. I've known many people that have either relapsed or never really gotten it and been able to commit to sobriety. And it's important to know that there are other people out there. If you put your hand out, there's going to be a hand out there for you. There are millions, 23 million people in recovery in our country, and we focus so much on those that aren't. But you have to realize that there is a group of us out there, and some people are more anonymous about it than others. So you don't always know, and you'd be surprised at how many people in your community may also be struggling the same way that you were. So please reach out for support. I'm going to give some links for some of the self-help group meetings that are out there. There are some for, males specifically that can be really helpful. And I really want people to know they're not alone.
Sarah, you're a hero with your own story, being willing to share that so openly. It takes a lot of courage. And so I just want to thank you for coming on the Fatherhood Challenge.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, this is the only reason I wrote this book, is to touch other lives and to find, meaning and purpose in the journey that I've had and hopefully short circuit the process.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatherhood Challenge. If you would like to contact us, listen to other episodes, find any resource mentioned in this program, or find out more information about the Fatherhood Challenge, please visit thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com.